All right, enough of the specs here. Let's see what is in the box. Obviously, we have the NZXT Hue Plus main unit. You can buy this separately, but I chose to buy it along with the two fans in one package. I think it's labeled something different. It's a little less expensive than buying the fans separately, but here's the main unit. It just screws in like a 2.5-inch hard drive or solid-state drive. It's powered by micro USB and a DC 5-volt connection that you can run internally. So thankfully you don't need to use like a wall plug or anything for that. And these are the Air RGB fans. These are, I think, $30 by themselves. I've seen them go for $40 in some places. There's some nice rubber coating on the sides of these that help provide better sound dampening. They're nice and quiet, and 4-pin PWM connections come native on these, so you can control fan speed and whatnot. And these are the in and out ports that you insert the RGB controls into. So now I'm going to go ahead and get my case wall off, and we'll dive right into the installation process. So the plan of attack for installing this Hue Plus is to move the default exhaust fan that's installed with the NZXT H440 up to the top right slot right here, or I guess you could call it top center, since there's the ability to install 3 fans up here if you were going to put a large radiator there. This is going to go to that second slot, and the 2 Hue fans are going to go where this exhaust fan used to be, and the left-hand side slot up here. That way the lighting is concentrated on this side, and maybe you would get a little bit more of an even lighting situation, especially since the integrated lighting that's already on the H440 is on the rear panel. So kind of focusing it in one zone would maybe make a little bit more sense initially, and then if you were to add more fans, you would then allow for more lighting to come across the top. I'm eventually going to add a lighting strip that I will probably run around this wall, which makes the most sense since the little glass panel does cover most of the left side, so the right side is still closed off, so that when you do put a LED lighting strip there, it doesn't affect anything, and you can't see the strip itself, which is what you would be intending to do if you were looking to do lighting. But the intention would be to put the Hue Plus in this 2.5 slot where this SSD would be. You could also install it back in the hard drive bays if you were going to do maybe a more central situation, but either way, you'll be able to run the cabling down into this cable management slot and do all of your wiring in the back. That way it still continues to have a relatively clean aesthetic in the front. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to install this. This is the first time I've attempted to run a setup like this, so it'll be a great way for hopefully both me to learn this process and for you to see whether there are any hiccups that you could commonly come across when installing RGB lighting in a case like this. Now, the first step in this installation process is to connect the Molex power cable to the Hue unit. This is using only 2 pins of the standard Molex connection, and remember that warning: do not connect while PC is powered on, which makes sense to me. Why would you be working inside your PC when it's powered on? You should never do that. And then this is just a standard DC 5-volt connector, so that goes in the this DC 5-volt port right here, and there you go. That will hopefully so I would suggest making all of your wired connections back here before you even install the device, especially if you don't have a detachable 2.5-inch bay like this. That will be really helpful during setup. All right, and the second step, which I would call the most important step, would be to connect your USB 2.0 header to the USB port on the back of the Hue Plus hub. This is what will allow the Hue box to connect to the software running on your computer. Typically it would be CAM, but I believe there are some other third-party factory options if you wanted to use those, but I'm just going to be using CAM for this installation. This will allow the software to communicate with the box and control the lighting situations that you could have with this kind of setup. So make sure you locate the the 9-point USB hub. There's usually several on your motherboard. I'm going to go ahead and change the camera here to see if I can locate mine on this certain motherboard. So right about here on my motherboard, this is towards the center of the bottom of the board itself. You'll see these 9 pins with the 10th pin missing, and that is where you're going to want to plug the 9-pin end of the USB 2.0 header into. Okay, when you use the kit by default, you're going to daisy chain the fans when it comes to the RGB control. You're going to run fan 1 and run a cable from fan 1 to fan 2. I'll explain that later, but basically each fan isn't taking up a separate controller port on this box. I made that mistake before. So the third step that's described in the manual is to connect the controller cable to the Hue Plus, and then to the Air RGB, which is basically just the model number of the fan, the in port on the fan itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove any fans that you may have in the way of the setup that you are trying to complete. So I'm just going to remove this 140 millimeter fan on the back of this case. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into case-specific instructions for the NZXT H440. Just note that I have the second edition, but I believe the first edition applies as well, but please skip to 11 minutes and 13 seconds to continue with the regular installation instructions. In this situation, it's as simple as removing 4 Phillips head screws. And most fans are built that way, so that should be relatively simple. And make sure that you're taking note of where your fan's cable routing is. In this case, since this is an integrated fan that was here before, it is run through a couple of little cable end ties right here. So just take note of that whenever you're removing the fan. Since I'm only going to be moving it up to this second slot over here, I may have enough cable room to run it up that way, but if I don't, then I'm gonna have to pull the cable out and route it a different way to have it make more sense. So we'll see what happens. It looks like I'm going to need to remove the top of the case in this situation. For the H440, it's basically the exact same as the front part of the case. You're just going to either you can pull really hard and it'll work that way, but I like to kind of hand maneuver it out, which means I am going to have to take off the cable management wall back here. So I hope you all don't mind while I do that. The pull makes more sense in this case. Now in the H440, it looks like the fan cable is running up back through this position, which thankfully there's a twist tie here, so you can disconnect that in a little bit of an easier fashion if you would like, which I'm going to need to do in order to get the Hue Plus to run correctly. So I'm going to undo this. Thankfully it is inside a little bit, it's inside a little divot, little rivet that they put in here, so that will allow you to reuse it. You don't have to move it from there. So the second twist tie for the fan is down here, so make sure you undo that as well. This is the NZXT fan controller that comes with the case, and the rear fan is plugged in. Make sure you note what port on the fan controller it is plugged into. You can kind of see there's little markers on the board itself that will tell you the fan number that you're supposed to assign the controller to. So now you can attempt to remove the fan, and there you go. The entire cable along with the 3 pins should come out no problem. Now I'm going to do it this way. You could obviously install the Hue now if you wanted to, since you have all this room in the top and the side of the case, but I'm just going to go ahead and put my factory fan that was already in here in the spot that I want it to be, which is this center port right here. Make sure that you're facing it in the exhaust mode. You can do it as an intake, like have air come in through the top of the case and then out the back to create positive pressure if that's what you wanted to do, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and mount it as an exhaust. That way it's going to fan out through the top of the case since there's some ventilation there, and I also think it looks better because then this face of the fan is facing inward. I think it's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing that way. So I'm going to go ahead and put the fan in on this end, run the cable through this little cable management grommet right there, and then I'm going to plug it right back into the fan 8 plug, I believe it was, on the NZXT fan controller. So this is the way I mounted the default 140 millimeter fan that came from the rear exhaust of the case here. You can see that this top left spot over here for 140s is up a little bit farther than this could probably go back here. As you can see, this is pretty far up in that space. So just remember, if you wanted to install a little bit further back, you'll have to put a 120. You can see that right here. The 120 millimeter marker definitely goes a good bit farther back than the 140 does. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to fit like, so basically that means that you cannot fit 3 140 millimeter fans back here. You can only fit 2, one here and then one up here. This area does not have a 140 millimeter fan slot available. It also means that once you put the 140 in this space, you won't be able to fit a 120 up here, because the slot that is originally used for this front fan slot is being taken by this 140. Cable through this little cable management hole here. Pretty simple. Actually get the Hue Plus fans in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and start the Hue Plus installation finally, after all the time I've wasted showing you guys how to move a fan that you guys might not even have. So we'll see. I don't know. Hopefully it'll be helpful. Now, when you're installing the Hue Plus, you may need to think about your layout situation. Like I was saying before, think about where the hub is going to be, and then where all of your fans are going to be within the case. And just make sure that the cables that were provided with the Hue Plus are long enough to reach each of those devices that you'll be using in this setup. So I mean, the 4-pin cables that come with the AE RGB or whatever this is called, whichever fan model this is, they're pretty long. They're, I guess you would call it standard for case fans. So you could theoretically run them through cable management and then back up to the mount, which is probably what I'm going to do. I'm just going to mount them like this, run them through the same grommet that the exhaust fan before was on, and then run it down behind the wall and then into where the Hue Plus is down here on that bottom 2.5 inch mount. So just keep that in mind whenever you're installing these. Don't forget to use the screws that came in the box of the Hue Plus to install the fans. Unless you happen to have some laying around, in that case you're lucky. Obviously the thing the manual says is to run this cable that has the in and out labels. The in port goes into the in on this fan, and then that runs down into the Hue Plus. And you also want to make sure that that's long enough, so I'm going to do this similar situation. With the way this is mounted, the in port is right on this side. So thankfully that's a good place for me to run it down into the management unit. I just want to make sure that that's long enough. It's a little bit more than the length of the case completely, so I'm going to trust that that's enough room, but we will see when I install it whether I'm wrong or not. I am going to run it through this larger cable management grommet just to be safe. I understand that the point of most RGB videos is, ooh, RGB, let's show off what it looks like, right? Which I'm definitely going to do, but sometimes these systems aren't the easiest to install, especially the more expensive ones that have more complicated pieces, like a central hub like this. So that'd be a good idea to at least document how difficult it is, or how easy it is, from someone who's never installed one before. Even if they're familiar with computer hardware, sometimes there are certain things that you don't always take into account the first time you install one of these things, especially the cable management side of it. Because honestly, if I was not making a video, I probably just would have been like, oh, I'm so excited to get RGB running in the PC, and I probably would have, you know, not thought some things all the way through and ended up shorting out, like having cable management that wasn't good, or ended up not looking good. And then as soon as I turned the lights on, I'm like, oh, this is ugly because there's freaking cables in the way. So all right, heard a clip in. Thankfully it was that simple. If you do have ports on your motherboard that you can use, I would highly suggest using one of your motherboard ports for this rear fan, because that is one of the more important exhaust fans. That's one you'll want to monitor if you're actually looking to monitor your fan speed. If you're just building this for a friend, who cares? But if this is your personal build, I would suggest doing that. It's a good way to just make sure your fans last as long as possible. Make sure you're running them the settings you want to. If you want your case quieter, you can do that with PWM. There's a lot of really helpful features that you get when you're running it that way. Before I wire up that second fan, obviously I had this header connected to port 1 on the box, but I unplugged it for the convenience of this part. So see, obviously you have the Molex pin connector. That's going to be for later. When you finally hook up the whole system, that's going to be the power that it's going to draw to here. The USB header that I plugged in, it's actually time to fish that out. I'm going to go ahead and mount the box now, and on this 2.5 mount there are the 4 screws here on the bottom. Jeez, this autofocus sucks on this camera. And then I will just mount the bottom 4 holes that are on this box through here with the 4 screws that are provided. There's one. And then you should be able to mount it just like that. Like that. Yeah. Okay. And make sure you don't lose your thumb screw. Put that back in the corresponding slot. And I am noticing that it's a little bit tight over here when you're putting this back in because this box is pretty wide, so it's not really a thumb screw anymore once you use this. So connect this, labeled out, to the out port of your first fan. I'm going to run this out port up through this top little caddy corner back here to the in port of this fan. The excess cable is going to go towards the rear of the case. Now remember that cable is coming out of fan 1 and going into fan 2, and there's nothing that will come out of fan 2. And fan 2 is only receiving the input from fan 1 and nothing else. Once you end up reaching your limit of 5 fans or 5 strips or whatever it is, 5 devices, you will then need to use the second channel to continue adding devices. Thankfully, I think most standard ATX cases won't really need that because I think that's plenty of lighting for one system. But then again, that's just an opinion. So someone could want to run as many lights as they have on their broed out Mitsubishi Eclipse, but that's all up to them. You still have to power up. We still have 2 4-pins, 1 from each fan, and those are both running here from the top. And then we have the Molex coming up from the bottom, and that's going to power the hub. These 4 pins, you will then want to route to whichever fan controller you're going to end up using. You can use the integrated one back here. Basically, the 4 pins, they just plug in like 3 pins. You can see it right here, but that 1 pin doesn't get used. So just like that, see, there's 1 pin up here that won't get used. So your PWM won't work in that case. Which means you can't really control fan speed as granularly as you could with a full 4-pin slot, but it will work until you get a fan controller. But what I think I might do is I'll see if there's any extra 4 pins left on my motherboard, and then I'll run them through to that. So these can be controllable through software. But then the Molex is simple. If you have an extra Molex just sitting around down here in your PSU bay, you can just plug it into that, that's probably what I'm going to end up doing. Yeah, I've got an extra Molex sitting right here, and I'm going to go ahead and run that under all this crap, and then I'll connect these 2 together. There you go. I don't see any extra 4-pin PWM connections that I have, at least, which means I'll probably end up having to get a fan controller at one point if I want to control them that way. But for now, here's what we're going to do on the H440 specifically. Let's run into fan 7, and then this can take fan 6. Obviously, this is arbitrary. You can order them however you want, but this is just how I'm ordering them for now. All right, we have moved the desktop over here. I have not touched anything, haven't put any of the back walls on or anything. I'm just running power over to the desktop and make sure that we get LEDs. Hopefully, it should be that simple. And as soon as we know that we have power, I can then hook everything back up, plug everything back in, put the walls back on, and then we'll get to the software. So power button is right here. Both fans are running, and you can see the little Hue controller down there on. So I would say that we are all good. We have not configured any LEDs or anything yet. Also, the factory fan above the LEDs up here is also spinning, no problem. So I would say that we are all set. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here, put the walls back on, do some cable management. All you really have to do is put those cables back with those zip ties where they need to be, and you should be all set. Yeah, that looks nice, right? A lot better lit on the inside there. So this is going from blue to like a purple, which you can't really see very well, to a little bit of a darker blue, and then back to light blue. That's the fade pattern. It's really nice. And then the little hue light on the box, you cannot change the default color from white, so just keep that in mind when you're installing it. If you don't want a white light affecting any of your other colors, you might as well just stick it in that 2.5-inch bay. But even without the LED strip, it's pretty well lit in there, and I do like the the other fan running up there as well. It's maybe a tad louder than before, but that's obviously just because I added a couple more fans than I had before. So yeah, thank you guys for checking this out. If you liked this or want to see more videos like this, let me know, and I will catch y'all later. Bye. Alright everybody, sorry. I think it has gotten a little bit darker because the situation is a little bit darker because my camera died. Everything's amazing now. I am continuing to screw in this 140mm fan all by myself. Apparently my wife thinks it's funny that she's making little chip noises in the background. Do you guys like the sound of potato chips in the back of your videos? Let me know in the comments below. Potato chips, tortilla chips, whatever they are. They all make the same sound when you pull them out of the bag, right? The tree falls in the middle of the forest. If it's an oak or a palm tree, do they make the same sound?